Hello and happy Friday, YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates, the news broadcast where we cover some of the biggest headlines and some of the most interesting stuff that took place in the AI space and some technology stuff, a little bit quantum stuff here and there. I hope your Friday is going well. Let's start off today with a little misinformation. I saw a story crop up, and this is the Ars Technica version of the story, but I did see this kind of catch fire, and everyone was covering this. But basically, there was a rumor that Microsoft's GitHub runs at a loss. Essentially, the claim here is that they're charging people like $10 a month, but it costs them more than $20 per person to actually institute this service and keep it running. And when I opened this article today, I did expect to find a retraction because this is a story that's been floating around for a couple of days now, and I have already seen that this has been walked back. In fact, here, just to show you, let's take a look at the video from Mario Rodriguez. He's the VP of Product at GitHub. And here he is talking about profitability in this specific area.
So if I ask you, Copilot is also a business. There was a recent report that we're losing money, and that's not true. But regardless of that, so how much do you think of ARR Copilot has today? And ARR is kind of like the annualized.
He answers it in a very long-winded way, so we're going to skip around.
So you're mostly right. Copilot today is a 100 million ARR product.
And based on what GitHub themselves is saying, and they can't go into exact figures, but they're making over $100 million in annual recurring revenue. And they did confirm that they're not running at a loss. So I'm not sure where the sourcing of that information came from. But when you're looking at news headlines, I think it's important to trust but verify in a lot of cases. All right, so let's talk Adobe. I saw a lot of rumblings about Adobe Max, a big presentation, and they were really pitching Firefly 2. It also seems like Adobe has purchased some influencers on Twitter. I noticed more recently, all of a sudden, a lot of the people with blue check marks, people that have been like AI bros or people in that AI space, a lot of people have suddenly taken a liking to Adobe and they're singing its praises. And sometimes you see that it's a hashtag ad and sometimes it just seems a little sus. Anyway, with all that said, Adobe has now got 3 billion images with Firefly as a tool under its belt. This is obviously something they're going to continue to pour a lot of resources into. And with Firefly 2 and the announcements that came out of Adobe Max, what we're seeing is a lot of expansion. So on screen now is image-to-image comparison when they're looking at Model 1 versus Model 2, and you can just see a fidelity difference. The newer model can offer like better and more detailed stuff. But what we're seeing, and this was a little bit of a surprise to me, is Adobe is dabbling into the video realm, and now you're able to do some generative fill and video editing with some of the stuff that you're seeing here. Essentially designing a bit of a magic eraser for video, as you can see how it works and how it's demonstrated here. And what you'll also see is other tools for vector graphics and things for like logo design that are going to be expanding outside of Photoshop and probably into a lot of the other Adobe programs as well. So you guys know I have mixed feelings about Firefly, about its origins, about its effect on the art industry and things of that nature. But at the same time, I can't deny that the effort and the technology that's behind this Adobe Firefly and some of the tools that they've come out with as a result have been pretty dang impressive. A couple of weeks ago, we had a rumor about OpenAI starting to work with the old hardware design chief expert of Apple. And at that time, we had no idea as to why. I mean, who knows? With OpenAI, they could be designing robots or what have you. But it turns out they're looking to make their own chips, which makes perfect sense, which should significantly reduce the amount of cost that goes into what they do. Now, I can't say that this is a novel idea. We've already talked about a number of companies that are working on AI-specific chips, because the GPU obviously works for what we're using it for, but it wasn't designed for that. And by building something that is designed specifically for AI, we could probably get a lot more bang for the buck. At least that's the hope, and that's the idea here. Now, obviously, any company that does this is going to end up in direct competition with NVIDIA, who has really been making out like a bandit with his entire AI craze. NVIDIA's GPUs have undoubtedly been the most powerful and the ones that everyone's been focusing on attaining so they can get their company off the ground. But that's resulted in a ton of shortages, making these things more expensive. But between the gamers that the cards were actually designed for and the markets that are trying to use them for alternate things like crypto and AI, I mean, there's just been so much of a shortage that these things are difficult to find and far more expensive than they need to be. They have been insanely profitable as a result of all this chaos, but they've also been pretty much without competition in this space. But with all that said, this article does make it clear OpenAI hasn't made a final decision yet. This is an idea that they have in the works that would solve a lot of their problems, but even if they executed it right now, it doesn't seem like they could get anything off the ground for a couple of years. At least that's what they're saying here. And I had a couple of updates in terms of Google, with what feels like a response to the DALL-E 3 thing coming out, and now that Bing has an AI image generator, it only seemed fitting that Google has an AI image generator that's just as easy or easier to access. But get this, I didn't anticipate that they would pop it right into the Google search bar. People who are part of Google Labs already and part of the search generative experience, which I guess is a pilot that Google is running, will have access to this right now, and you just type right into your search bar and then boom, you got images. It looks like everything is being prompted right now through ImGen, which is Google's image generator. It's maybe not on the exact same level as some of the other ones that we've been looking at, but it is nice to see that Google is coming out with an alternative. Like I always say, any competition in this space is always going to be a good thing. Now, this is probably a Google response to a lot of the things that we've already seen out there. And one of the things that I did find funny is that Google also did the very voluntary thing that we've seen Microsoft do, and even the same thing that we saw Adobe do, which is offer to take on the legal fight if you get sued for copyright for using any of these images or anything like that. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly why they started opting to do that. It's an interesting strategy, and as far as I know, it's very voluntary, but it does give you an idea of the level of confidence that these companies have in terms of how legally protected they are in terms of copyright. Now, segueing a little bit into somewhat of a similar category, we're talking about image rights, and Cyberpunk 2077 is actually a very interesting thing to look at in terms of image rights, because they have the likeness rights, the vocal rights for Keanu Reeves, for example. He's not just an extra within the game, he's a main character. But all that aside, this is something a little bit different. This is a character who was in the original game who unfortunately wasn't around for the DLC. But from what it sounds like, using generative AI, they were actually able to bring his voice into the new expansion of the game. So if you did play Cyberpunk, you'll probably recognize Victor Vector. He was one of the original Ripper docs that you meet within the game. And his voice in the expansion DLC was apparently AI generated. Now, all of this is happening at a very tumultuous time in terms of workers' rights and in terms of people that are authorizing strikes, especially in the video game industry. And like I said, this does bring up a lot of questions in terms of likeness rights and who owns what. At least his family in this case was involved, gave their blessing, and they felt like this was a great way to honor their loved one. You know, someone who was in the original game, etc. At the same time, there is the other side of the coin, where this did prevent an actor who would have maybe been hired as a replacement to cover that job. And while that might be a little bit cold, I have to acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have to see it specifically that way, especially in this labor fight. We continue to talk about labor rights and unionization. It almost comes with the territory here. And in that vein, I actually wanted to share this with you too, because this Marvel Studios tweet came out. And just like a politician who votes against something and then comes back and says, hey, look what we did for our state. You have Marvel Studios basically saying, hey, look at what we're going to do to protect actors. But as the community notes here point out, these changes are a result of the collective bargaining, the collective action behind the Writers Guild. None of this would have taken place without that strike. None of it would have happened at all. Hence, the 148-day wait. And in that vein, I did just want to cover an update in terms of the SAG-AFTRA strike. It does look like there's been a bit of a standstill. The Hollywood studios are walking away from negotiations saying something like, 2% is too much. But both this link and the next one should be really interesting reading for those of you who want to go into a little bit of the background for how this kind of problem came about. Obviously, I'm not an actor, I can't speak for actors or this entire industry, but I did find this IGN article quite interesting. It does go into the history of how television was formed and how some of these deals came about, when the streaming industry came about, how things changed. Now, my takeaway here, and I could be dead wrong, but it seemed like when streaming came about, it seemed like a risky venture. So people agreed to things that weren't necessarily as fair as what they got on television, where it was not nearly as risky. But obviously when streaming replaced television and the capitalists who own these streaming services didn't offer to just say, hey, take some of my billions of dollars, that's where we ended up with this incredible wage disparity, where unfortunately even people like Aaron Paul aren't making money on Breaking Bad episodes on streaming services. And that's just kind of crazy when you think about it. Especially when you go to ask yourself, okay, well then who is making all of that money? And you find out it was people who are hardly involved at all. Anyway, I thought this would be a great place to end today's video. If you do want to read more into this or even watch the video, IGN did put a very nice little thing together here. But I do always appreciate you stopping by, checking out the news with me. I want to thank you guys for the likes and interactions, especially some of the comments recently. Some people have been insanely supportive, and I really, really do appreciate that. But I'll get out of your hair today. I hope you do enjoy the rest of your Friday. And come check me out next week for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Thanks for watching.